Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. So let me catch you up real quick. Chioma and Park Lee just went through the embryo transfer in Singapore, and now they're in the impossible 10-day waiting period to find out if she's actually pregnant with a Korean Mafia boss's baby. They're living in his penthouse. The tension is thick enough to cut with a knife, and neither of them knows how to deal with the fact that they might actually be starting to care about each other. If you're still not subscribed after 3 episodes of this absolute chaos, hit that subscribe button right now because episode 4 is where everything changes, and I promise you don't want to miss what's coming next. Let's get into it. The private jet hummed softly through the night sky as they flew back to Seoul, but the cabin atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Chioma sat rigidly by the window, arms crossed defensively over her chest, staring out at the darkness below. Park Lee occupied the seat across from her, a glass of expensive wine in his hand, his eyes sharp and calculating as he watched her with that infuriating intensity she'd come to recognize as his planning face. When he was thinking several moves ahead, when he was preparing to issue commands disguised as suggestions. "When we land, I'm going straight to my apartment," Chioma said coldly, not looking at him. "I need my own space, my own things. I need to breathe without you hovering over every decision I make." "No," he said simply, not even looking up from his wine glass. "You'll stay with me at the penthouse. It's already been decided." Her head snapped toward him, fury igniting in her chest. "I'm not your property, Park Lee. You don't get to just decide where I live. I refuse to suffocate under your ridiculous controlling rules." He leaned forward then, setting down his wine glass with deliberate precision, his voice dropping to that tone that was somehow both soft and absolutely unyielding, like steel wrapped in silk. "You're carrying my future inside you, Chioma. My child, my heir, my legacy. That makes you my responsibility whether you like it or not. And you don't get to choose recklessness when there's a life at stake. Responsibility doesn't mean total control over another human being." She shot back, her voice rising. "I'm not a child who needs constant supervision." He lifted one eyebrow, his expression shifting into something dangerous. "You're carrying something more valuable than diamonds, more precious than any business deal I've ever made, and you want me to let you live alone in that shoebox apartment with no security, no medical supervision, no one to help if something goes wrong? Do you understand how insane that sounds?" "I'm carrying a life, not a business investment," she said, her voice shaking with anger and something else she couldn't quite name. "And I need peace. I need space away from you, and your suffocating presence, and your constant judgment." They glared at each other across the cabin, a silent battle of wills crackling in the air between them like electricity before a storm. The jet engines hummed. The city lights of Seoul grew closer below them. Neither blinked. Neither backed down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Park Lee leaned back in his seat, his lips curling into the faintest, most infuriating smirk. "Fine," he said quietly. "Stay in your apartment, if you must. But don't be surprised when I show up constantly to check on you. Don't complain when you see me more in your space than you ever did at the hotel." She scoffed, turning back to the window, but her heart was pounding. She'd won the argument, technically. So why did it feel like he'd somehow still gotten exactly what he wanted? As the jet touched down in Seoul and they went through the private terminal, Chioma returned to her modest apartment in Itaewon with a sense of relief, so profound it made her knees weak. Her own space, her own bed, her own rules. She thought she'd left Park Lee behind on that private runway, thought she'd finally reclaimed some measure of independence and control over her own life. She was spectacularly wrong. He came constantly, at unpredictable hours that kept her perpetually off balance. Sometimes he knocked, at least giving her the courtesy of warning. More often, he simply walked in using a key she didn't remember giving him, but that he'd somehow acquired anyway, carrying bags of food, baskets of expensive fruit, mysterious tonics from traditional medicine shops, supplements recommended by doctors she'd never met. Sometimes he stayed long enough to criticize her eating habits and argue about her sleep schedule. Sometimes he stayed long enough to make her forget, just for a moment, exactly how much she was supposed to hate him. "Do you ever knock?" she demanded one afternoon, slamming her door in frustration as he entered carrying yet another bag of groceries. "Do you understand the concept of privacy? Of boundaries? of basic human courtesy? He dropped the bag on her small kitchen table with casual confidence, completely unruffled by her anger. I don't knock on my own investments. That would be inefficient. I'm not a stock portfolio, she said through gritted teeth. I'm a human being with rights and feelings, and a very strong desire to throw something heavy at your head. He smirked, leaning closer in that way that always made her pulse race with what she insisted was pure anger. Then act like a human being who values her own health. Eat properly. Sleep adequately. Stop trying to collapse on me in inconvenient locations. The gifts kept coming. Fruit baskets filled with exotic selections she couldn't pronounce. Soups in expensive containers from restaurants she couldn't afford. Luxury skincare products she didn't need but found herself using anyway because they smelled amazing and made her skin feel incredible. Each delivery sparked an argument. Each argument somehow left her more confused about what they were to each other. Stop barging into my home like you own the place, she said furiously one morning, finding him in her kitchen putting away groceries before she'd even finished getting dressed. He shrugged, completely unbothered, placing organic vegetables in her nearly empty refrigerator. I practically do own it through the amount I'm paying in your stipend. And your fridge was empty except for instant noodles and questionable leftovers. That's unacceptable. She snatched the bag from his hands, but he'd already pulled out an apple. I can take care of myself. I've been doing it successfully for 24 years without your interference. Sure, he said, tossing the apple in his hand with that insufferable smirk. That's why you faint in hallways and forget to eat for 12 hours at a time. Your self-care is truly inspirational. She threw the apple at his head. He caught it with one hand without even looking, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. She wanted to scream. She wanted to hit him with something heavier. But sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, his eyes lingered on her face too long. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't paying attention, her heart betrayed her with a stutter that had nothing to do with anger. 3 weeks after they returned from Singapore, it began. The symptoms she'd been simultaneously dreading and hoping for. The exhaustion that hit like a physical weight, dragging her down no matter how much she slept. The dizziness that came in waves, turning the world tilted and unreliable. The strange metallic taste in her mouth that no amount of water could wash away. And worst of all, the violent nausea that struck without warning and left her weak and trembling. One night, bent over her bathroom sink, her entire body rebelling against everything she'd eaten that day, she grabbed her phone with shaking fingers. She didn't think. She just dialed his number, and when he answered, her voice came out weak and frightened in a way she hated. I don't feel right, she managed between waves of nausea. Something's wrong. I think something might be really wrong. Stay there, he said immediately, and she heard movement on his end, the sound of car keys, a door slamming. Don't move. I'm coming. Minutes later, he was there. Not in one of his perfectly tailored suits this time, but in casual clothes that looked thrown on in a hurry, his hair slightly disheveled, his eyes sharp with something that looked alarmingly like genuine worry. No arrogance this time. No smirking superiority. Just focused intensity as he took in her pale face and shaking hands. He found her on the bathroom floor, and without a word, he knelt beside her. When the next wave of nausea hit, he held her hair back with surprising gentleness, his other hand pressed steady and warm against her spine. Easy, he said quietly, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Just breathe through it. Let it out. Don't fight it. After, when she was weak and trembling and thoroughly humiliated, he helped her to the couch. He brought water, insisted she take tiny sips. He ordered food from somewhere, bland things that wouldn't upset her stomach. He adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, tucked it carefully around her legs, his movements efficient but unexpectedly tender. You're being nice, she whispered, too exhausted to maintain her usual defenses. It's confusing and slightly terrifying. He settled into the chair across from her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Don't tell anyone. It would absolutely ruin my carefully cultivated reputation as a heartless bastard. She almost laughed, but sleep was already pulling at her, dragging her down into darkness. The last thing she was aware of was his presence, solid and reassuring, like an anchor in a storm. That night, Park Lee didn't leave. He sat awake in her cramped living room, watching the rise and fall of her chest as she slept, alert for any sign that something might be wrong. By morning, she was still weak, curled on the couch under the blanket he'd adjusted 3 times during the night. He stood watching her, arms crossed, his analytical mind working through possibilities and probabilities. "When did you last have your cycle?" he asked abruptly, his voice cutting through the quiet morning. Her eyes flew open, mortification flooding her features. "What? What kind of question is that? That's incredibly personal and inappropriate. Answer me, Chioma." His voice was firm, unyielding. "If it's late, if you've missed it, that means something significant. Don't act like I don't understand basic biology." Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. No one had ever spoken to her that bluntly about her body before. It was humiliating. It was intimate in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. "I don't have to tell you about my menstrual cycle. That's private." He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "You do have to tell me because if you've missed it, combined with these symptoms, it means the embryo transfer was successful. I've dated women before, Chioma. I understand how this works. You should have a monthly cycle. When you miss it, especially now, it matters enormously." She pulled the blanket tighter, avoiding his eyes as she did the mental calculation. "It's late. By several days, actually. But that could be stress, or hormones from the treatment, or—" "Exactly," he cut her off. "You're late and experiencing severe morning sickness. Take a pregnancy test."
"Now."
"Already?" she asked defensively. "Isn't it too early to know for certain? Better to know than to spend days wondering and worrying." He pulled a pregnancy test from the bag he'd apparently brought with him, having already anticipated this possibility. "Take it." The test lay on her bathroom counter like an unexploded bomb. Through the door, she could hear him pacing in her living room, his footsteps creating an anxious rhythm. She sat on the edge of her bathtub, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the test, watching the seconds tick by on her phone timer like hours. When the 2 lines appeared, clear and unmistakable, she nearly dropped it. Her hands shook violently as she stared at the small plastic stick that had just changed everything. "It's positive," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at him standing in the doorway, and for the first time since she'd met him, his carefully constructed mask completely slipped. Relief flooded his features. Triumph. And something else, something deeper and more complicated that she couldn't quite identify. He froze for just a second, his sharp eyes softening before hardening again into something determined and focused. He stepped closer, his gaze pinning her in place with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "Get dressed," he said firmly. "We're going to the hospital immediately. I want proper medical confirmation, blood tests, everything. We need to be absolutely certain." At the hospital, the doctor confirmed what the home test had already told them. Chioma was pregnant, approximately 4 weeks along. The embryo had successfully implanted. The word felt heavy, fragile, terrifying, and impossibly real. There was a tiny cluster of cells inside her body that would become a human being. Park Lee's child. Their arrangement had just become undeniably, irreversibly real. On the ride back to her apartment in his car, she protested fiercely, her earlier compliance evaporating. "I'm not moving into your penthouse. I already told you I need my own space, and pregnancy doesn't change that. I can take care of myself." He cut her off with a look that could have frozen fire. "You're moving in.
Today."
And if I have to send my people to pack every single sock you own and carry your furniture piece by piece, I will do exactly that. This isn't negotiable anymore, Chioma." And he did. By nightfall, Chioma stood in the middle of his gleaming penthouse, her belongings scattered around her, furious at being overruled but too exhausted to fight anymore. Her apartment had been packed with ruthless efficiency by a team of people who clearly answered only to Park Lee. She was trapped. Or protected. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. Days blurred into strange new rhythms. She woke nauseous almost every morning, sometimes unable to keep down even water. Some nights, she couldn't sleep at all, tossing and turning until dawn painted the windows with gray light. He noticed everything. Always. Every morning before he left for whatever business dealings occupied his days, he came to her room. Every night before bed, He asked what she needed, and he made sure she had it. He assigned 2 maids to attend to her needs, but still he hovered, restless and vigilant. They still fought. Heated, passionate arguments about everything and nothing that ended with slammed doors and trembling hands and words they both sometimes regretted. But something in the air between them was shifting, changing into something neither could quite name or control. Somewhere in the fighting, they had begun to notice each other not as adversaries, but as something far more complicated and dangerous. One afternoon, the penthouse door opened to reveal an elegant woman in her late 50s, radiating warmth and maternal authority. Madame Park swept in with the confidence of someone who'd raised empires and children with equal success. She took one look at Chioma's pale, exhausted face and immediately gathered her into a gentle hug that made Chioma's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "You must be so tired, dear," Madame Park said softly, her voice kind in a way that made Chioma want to cry. "Pregnancy takes such tremendous strength, especially in the early weeks. My son is taking proper care of you, I hope?" Chioma blinked, completely shocked by the genuine kindness. Park Lee, meanwhile, shifted uncomfortably in the corner like a teenager caught doing something embarrassing. Later, at dinner, Madame Park fixed her son with a stern gaze that probably still made him feel 12 years old. "She's carrying your child," she said firmly, addressing him while Chioma sat frozen in surprise. "Stop being an emotional wall. She needs warmth, not ice. She deserves far better than your coldness and controlling behavior. Treat her like the woman who is giving you a child, not like a business contract you need to manage." Chioma's eyes widened. Park Lee's jaw tightened, but his mother wasn't finished. She turned to Chioma with a smile that held decades of wisdom. "And you, my dear, don't give up on him too quickly. My son is incredibly stubborn, but his walls are much thinner than he pretends. He feels far more than he shows." Park Lee scowled into his wine glass, but his mother's words burrowed deep, taking root in places he'd thought were sealed off completely. That night, he found himself staring too long at Chioma across the dinner table, noticing things he'd been trying not to see. The way candlelight caught in her eyes, the graceful movement of her hands, the strength it took to deal with him day after day, without breaking. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the penthouse kitchen, but instead of the usual breakfast aromas, the air smelled like ginger tea and anxiety. Park Lee walked in to find Chioma sitting cross-legged on his marble counter, her braids messy and uncombed, clutching a jar of pickles in one hand and strawberry jam in the other. As he watched in mounting horror, she dipped a pickle into the jam and bit down with an expression of pure relief. "That's a crime against food," he said, staring. "That's genuinely disturbing to witness." "Don't judge me," she said around a mouthful, glaring at him. "This is literally the only thing that doesn't make me want to vomit. My body has completely betrayed me, and pickles with jam are apparently the only solution." He pinched the bridge of his nose, sighing deeply. But within minutes, he was at the refrigerator, pulling out fruit, crackers, cheese, even ice cream, setting options in front of her like a resigned waiter catering to an impossible customer. "Fine," he said flatly. "Eat whatever circus combination your stomach demands. Just please don't faint on me again." Later that day, she did throw up, violently and miserably. Kneeling on the cold bathroom floor, tears pricking her eyes from the physical strain, she muttered bitterly, "I hate this. I hate feeling so weak and out of control. I didn't ask for any of this." Her voice cracked, and before she could stop them, hot tears were rolling down her cheeks. She didn't even know why she was crying. Hormones, probably. Exhaustion, definitely. The overwhelming reality of what was happening to her body. To her shock, Park Lee crouched down beside her, one hand steady on her shoulder. "Then hate me instead," he said quietly, softer than she'd ever heard him speak. "Shout at me. Blame me for everything. Just don't try to carry it all alone." She buried her face in her hands, still crying, unable to stop the tears, or the shaking, or the fear. He hesitated for just a moment, then pulled her against his chest, letting her sob into his expensive shirt. His palm moved slowly across her back, the gesture awkward but steady, anchoring her like he was afraid she might drift away if he let go. "Cry as much as you need to," he murmured into her hair. But after, you're going to eat something substantial. Deal? She pulled back to glare at him through watery eyes, her face blotchy, and her nose running. You're still bossy, even when you're being nice. He smirked faintly, reaching up to brush her cheek with his thumb in a gesture that seemed almost unconscious. And you're still impossible, but you're my responsibility. That hasn't changed. For a moment, the vast penthouse didn't feel cold or impersonal. It felt almost like home. Or, at least like the possibility of home, which was somehow even more terrifying. One evening, steam curled from the bathroom as Chioma stepped out after a long shower, her towel wrapped securely around her body. She didn't expect anyone, wasn't prepared for company, so when the bedroom door opened and Park Lee walked in, she froze completely. He stopped at the doorframe, and his gaze swept over her slowly, deliberately, taking in the water droplets on her shoulders, the way the towel clung to her curves, the vulnerable shock on her face. He leaned against the frame with a dangerous smile. "I like what I see," he said, his voice dropping low and husky in a way that made heat pool in her stomach. Her breath caught. Her pulse hammered. Her first instinct was to grab the towel tighter, to cover herself more completely, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. His eyes held her frozen in place. "You're actually quite stunning," he continued, that smirk curving into something dangerous and promising. "Even with that sharp tongue and stubborn attitude, you're incredibly attractive." Startled, she clutched the towel tighter, but her lips betrayed her. A small, nervous smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, and she couldn't quite hide it. The air between them crackled with possibility, with something that had been building for weeks and was finally, dangerously close to igniting. So there we are. Chioma is pregnant with Park Lee's baby, living in his penthouse, and they just had their most charged moment yet. The walls between them are crumbling, and neither of them knows what to do about it. If you think this is complicated now, just wait until next episode when things get even more intense. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on because you absolutely cannot miss what happens next. Drop a comment telling me whether you think they're falling for each other or if this is still just convenience and hormones. I'll see you in episode 5 where everything gets even more complicated. To be continued.